Okay, now in your opening remarks you mentioned about obviously the technology challenge, and you specifically mentioned the future of money and Bitcoin and those kinds of things, which are kind of the sort of exciting areas. But is it something that you need to respond to yet, or is it just a little bit too small and marginal at the moment?
I think Bitcoin is I have to say, I find it an interesting technology. I would think at the same time that it is money, and money is something that most governments consider as something that's extremely important for the economy and something they like to have their finger on. So I think once Bitcoin becomes really successful, they'll face the music in terms of regulation, in terms of having national interest, having interest from national governments, etc. But it's an exciting space to watch. Okay,
but the more interesting thing for SWIFT members is new forms of payment, really, isn't it?
Right.
Either through mobile or different electronic formats. So how are you challenging that as an organisation?
As an organization, we're leveraging those same technologies. Mobile is a good example. A lot of mobile development is the last mile between a customer and the bank, and that doesn't really impact our space. But what we are offering now in Africa and rolling out to other parts of the world is what we call Alliance Connect Everywhere, and that is allows a bank to use 3G as the final mile between them and SWIFT. At present, you need either a leased line or an internet connection to connect to SWIFT as a bank. In many parts of Africa, you don't have that, either of those. And Alliance Connect Everywhere allows you to use a 3G connection with a 3G SIM card, plus the SWIFT scrambling encryption hardware, if you will, to connect over the wireless networks.
All right, and what sort of take-up have you had with that? And what sort of volumes could you get out of something like that?
We'll see. We announced it at the African Regional Conference earlier this year, but we got I have to say, I talked to quite a lot of banks there, and I got a lot of positive response on it. So we're developing it as we speak. I think it will be rolled out later this year or early next year. It will not, for the big banks, they will rely on VPNs, and they should. But for the smaller banks, I think it might be quite an interesting opportunity. Yes.
Okay, now you said that in mobile, a lot of the cases, it's the last mile between the bank and the customer, so it's not really your side of things. But the cloud, that really is your side of things, right?
It is.
That could affect the back office quite fundamentally. So tell me a little bit about your cloud strategy.
And I always have to start with the remark that from a customer perspective, we have always been a sort of a cloud service, right? We are operating in the cloud in our data centers, etc. Now, of course, that's a bit cheeky because the word was only invented a couple of years ago, but we're, if you will, a cloud service avant la lettre. What we are doing is we're making available quite some services as a cloud service, and Light 2 is a good example. We are taking the Alliance software that used to run on the customer premise available as a cloud service. That's what Light 2 really is. You get a piece, you get a front end, a client as a customer, but the Alliance software itself resides in our data centers in the cloud. The same thing, sanction screening is essentially a cloud service. We host the screening software in our cloud from a member's perspective. So that's we are a user of Salesforce.com, which is a cloud service. So I think it is starting to impact us on many fronts.
Okay,
well,
now
it's exciting. Yeah.
You mentioned about data centers there, and I mean the big buzzword at the moment is big data, and you've got a session or two on big data at Sibos in Dubai, and the startling fact I heard about it was that 90% of the world's data has been created in the last year, right? But I heard that a few months ago, so it might be 95% by now.
But a lot of that is YouTube, and you got
yeah. But it does present a genuine problem for the banks, doesn't it? I mean, they were criticised for being really quite bad at handling data and having it all in different silos, even before we got to the era of big data. So now we've got this massive preponderance of data, and they're still struggling with what they used to have before. So how are they going to manage that challenge now, and how are you managing it at SWIFT?
Yeah, I think you'll have to ask the banks how they're managing it. I think it's a real opportunity for everybody. It's an opportunity for the banks. It's an opportunity for us. When it comes to the data that we have, we've launched quite some initiatives over the past years to enable that, what we call business intelligence, which allows our members to analyze traffic data at the flow level, who their counterparts is, compare them against peer groups, etc. We've seen very good take-up of that product. At the same time, we realize it's our customers' data. So for us, we try to stay within the limits of confidentiality, respecting the fact that it's somebody else's data, while allowing our members to use it for analytical purposes and making the most out of their Swift infrastructure. But I think in general, it is a real opportunity both for us and for our members.
Okay, so I mean, can we talk through any scenarios about what they could do with data, the kinds of problems they could solve that they couldn't do in the past?
For example, what they can do is they can have a look at their Swift flows in different countries and see whether, you know, in certain countries they're growing in correspondent banking, they're not growing, whether they're growing against the market. So it allows them to really see whether their strategy in terms of targeting certain markets for trade, foreign exchange, correspondent banking securities, whether that strategy is working, how they're comparing against peers that are in that same market. So in that sense, it really helps them, at least that's what I hear from our customers, help them evaluate their commercial strategy and optimize that.
And you also mentioned that, you know, it's their data, it's not our data,
right,
which kind of raises the idea of security and cybersecurity, especially if you start to use the cloud. So, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, you're getting something like 21 million messages a day in some cases, so that's an awful lot of security you need there.
It's interesting. When I started as head of marketing 5-6 years ago, a lot of the feedback I got from customers is, yeah, Swift is really very heavy-handed to deal with. I need dedicated hardware, double encryption, VPN boxes, HSMs, and you can give the whole thing. And guys, you know, this is the age of the internet. Why is it so complicated? And isn't security? Aren't you security obsessed? Was a little bit the feedback I got. You don't hear that anymore. I think they now all realize why we put in place all that stuff. So I think we come from a background where we are well prepared both at the infrastructure level, but as important at the cultural level. I think our people are very conscious of security and how important that is, and confidentiality. And we have a very strong culture in that respect. At the same time, we cannot be complacent, like nobody can. We see the sophistication of cybercrime increasing rapidly. We've seen attacks on the financial services industry that were unprecedented in their sophistication. DDoS attacks of bandwidth that were unheard of. So we are absolutely raising our game, investing in that area and trying to stay as far ahead of the curve as we've always been. So we take it very seriously, and for us it's part of our core business and core mission.